All right. So I'm going to kick it over to our awesome panelists to introduce themselves. Anne, let's go ahead and start with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Bao, and I'm founder and CEO of Ignite Consulting. So Ignite Consulting, fractional CRO, fractional RevOps, support executive leadership to seed stage companies all the way through to late stage. And I do have one public client previous to Ignite, which I founded about a year and a half ago. I've been working in operations, analytics, revenue teams for 20 plus years for startup Series C, D, IPO, and public. Also on the board for Women in Revenue, and I'm a big RevOps enthusiast, founder of RevOps Village. So great to be here. Thank you so much, Kamala.
Thanks for being here. And Puyan.
Awesome. Thanks for having me as well. Hi, everybody. I'm Puyan Salahi. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Scratchpad. Been doing that. We started the company about 4 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer. This is my second company in the sales tech space. After the last one, we had when I say we, my co-founder and I had pretty aggressively decided not to do another one in the sales tech space, yet here we are. And it was mostly driven by just seeing such a big gap in technology that's actually working for people that are doing the job versus something that's just being built for the sake of tech, and we think it's interesting. So that's what really pulled us in. I'd say the common thread between us and why we keep doing what we do is we just really love building products that solve problems where workflow is a really important part. So where humans need to do some jobs, and those jobs actually have very meaningful outcomes, and finding ways to make those delightful, faster, better. Before that, again, another sales technology company. We did not have a background in sales. We were engineering by background and then studied business. My co-founder's an engineer as well. With our first company that we built, we had the product and we said, gosh, we have to sell it now. So we went through the whole motion of learning how to sell and talk to every salesperson we could and read books and what have you. And that's what just helped us build a lot of empathy for what salespeople have to go through. And over the years, we've really learned a lot about RevOps and enablement and leadership and all of the supporting roles for the frontline sellers. So anyway, that was a little bit longer, but wanted to give that context, and I'm really excited to be here. And thank you, Anne, for joining us.
Wonderful. So let's talk about which CRM problem we're talking about, because I think a few of us on the call feel that we have more than one. So would love to dig into what this means for today's call.
Rian, I'll let you go first.
Sure. And actually, Cameron, I think that's a great point, because I think some people might respond with, yeah, the CRM problem is that we have one. I don't know many people that think about their CRM and happy thoughts come in, or that's their happy place to go to. But I'll just reflect what we have seen at Scratchpad and even at our last company is in almost every organization, whether you're at a small one, mid-sized one, large one, whether it's a software technology company or hardware, you're doing services, doesn't really matter. There is some system that is called a CRM that's put into place. And in almost all of the instances that we have seen, they essentially end up acting as a database. And worse than that, it's a database that is not actually having the most important, fresh, accurate information. And so then there's an incredible amount of effort that goes into trying to make this the database that actually helps the business make decisions. So I think that's why we're here today, is to talk about that problem. We've heard it mentioned in many different ways, but it's the hygiene problem that seems to be pretty prevalent across most orgs that we talk to. But Anne, I'll turn to you to see if how that resonates.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for the audience, when we were prepping for this, I was like, oh, big CRM hygiene problem. Wow, that's not the sexiest problem, but it's a problem that we all identify with and care about. And typically when I go into an organization, I'll be joining a company, 200, 250 people. Maybe they've had a RevOps team. It's like a couple individuals. There's like an admin and maybe another ops, like jack of all trades or Jacqueline of all trades. And then they have this CRM that they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on. That's just like a big dumpster graveyard for like data and information, and that the entire sales and CS and probably even market is like complaining about. Like, it's unusable. We don't actually know what we're supposed to do. We don't know what's required. We don't actually know how this supports any of our processes. It just is very belaboring. And so that is a problem that it's viewed as like a real technology problem, but I'm like, we need to unpack this, which we're going to get into today. It's not just the technology. A lot of people point to that. Let's just replace it. Let's just replace Pipedrive and put in HubSpot, or replace SFTC, and then all of our problems are going to be solved. And I think I'm really excited to talk about are all of the things around the CRM that have to be in place to eliminate or maybe reduce what is a problem.
I'll just add one more thing that we don't actually have listed here, but I think it might be important to talk about is why are we talking about this today? And what we have seen lately is it's almost it's a problem that everyone knows that they have. And most people have essentially given up on feeling like they can actually solve it at the core. So it's more this game of whack-a-mole of, okay, you know what? We can't get to the core because we can't necessarily, like, and to your point, ripping out and replacing a CRM isn't really going to solve that problem. And so let's just try to solve all the symptoms. And I think the reason we're talking about the CRM hygiene problem today is because we think we have a perspective on how you can think about it differently and how to actually influence that hygiene problem in a way that actually gets down to the root. So that's what we're hoping to really get into today.
So everyone loves this portion of every webinar, and you're a bunch of sadists because people love to hear trauma or examples of why this is at the front of our minds. So I'm going to open it up first to Anne.
Yes, many traumas. So I'm going to share one. It was an organization that I joined several years ago. Again, they had two people in their RevOps team. I was their first RevOps leader. They had a Salesforce admin who really was more of an architect, so a really strong architect. We were very lucky that we had that. He didn't know he was an architect yet. He became an architect. We had an ops person, and then we had Salesforce, which we were spending $400,000 a year on. We had 140 people in this company. I got in there and I was like, why are we spending this much money? What are we doing with this? What are we using it for? And then when I actually was like, okay, we're spending $400,000, this must be like the Rolls Royce of Salesforce deployments, right? The feedback that I was hearing, true story, my VP of sales was like, you need to fire that Salesforce admin. For first week, you need to fire that person. Salesforce is like the bane of my existence. There's all these fields. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. And I said, let's do an audit. How many fields are there? And just in the opportunity account object alone, there were 700 plus fields. And when I started to unpack the fields, like I said, graveyard, dumpster fire, when I actually understood, like, how did it get to this place where we had 4 or 5 fields trying to solve for the same thing? There was no real empowerment in that RevOps team, no real executive leadership to push back on one executive being like, just add this field, no understanding of the why behind it. So as a result, there were many duplicative fields. There was no one. I asked the question, oh, do me a favor. We have Salesforce as our CRM. We're spending $400,000 on it. Great. That's a lot of money. And we have all of these other satellite systems. What are the integrations look like across these systems? How are we really driving automation and better workflows? Where's our enterprise systems landscape diagram? They looked at me, they were like, well, what is that? And so I was like, oh my goodness. So we had capital inefficiency that was happening. We had an underutilized CRM. We had a really contentious relationship between our systems team and between our sales team. And I will share that's not how it ended. It got much better, but that's how we began. And that was like my first week. So that was a fun one to step into.
Yeah, and I would love to see reactions on the screen for people who've heard the phrase, that's why we pay salespeople a base salary when it comes to data entry, because my goodness, have I heard that many times. Puyan, do you have anything to add here that you've seen?
Oh my gosh, yeah, maybe we should do this at some point, is just an entire series or webinar just on the trauma that we've seen across the board. But definitely what Anne has seen, we have seen. And again, for context, we work with a lot of companies, so we get to see their Salesforce instances and how they're set up. Let me talk about a few of them pretty quickly. So number one, just to get very specific, 5 next step fields. Why, you might ask? Do you need 5 next step fields? There was one called next step. There was one called next steps. There was a next steps with, I think, some underscore, and then it was like a longer text field, and then something else and something else. And I should step back for a second. I wanted to talk about trauma from a few different levels. There's trauma. We talk about CRM trauma, but the implications of that trauma impact the frontline sellers. They impact the managers, they impact the leaders, they impact the SFDC admins, the ops people that have to support it, enablement. So I could go through every single one of these because we've seen a ton, but I'm going to pick a few. So on the rep field, on the rep experience, we're helping them get Scratchpad set up. What it does is it makes Salesforce a lot easier and faster to work with. And they literally had 5 next step fields. And that was just like, I don't even know what to do here. Why do we have that? And it unpacked. Nobody likes to go back and clean Salesforce up. So they had a series of turnovers, and new ops people came in, and everyone wants to put their own mark onto it. And so they put their new next step field. So that caused a lot of issues. You go further downstream. Let's say you've done your big Salesforce deployment. You've brought in the consultants and the experts, and they've done it all. Even then, afterwards, we saw a fresh new Salesforce instance, which should be shining and it should be crisp and it should be delightful to look at. Problem was, it wasn't. And worse than that, it was so slow to load that the trauma from the rep experience, and I'll just for context, I'll add this at Scratchpad, one thing we believe in is simplicity, but also in order to get that, you have to understand how people work. So personally, I've sat behind many AEs and just watched them work. My co-founder has, our entire team has. So we were there behind them, watching them, how long it took. And you can just see the agitation in the rep causing trauma because they're like, I have 5 other things in my mind. I just got off that call. Ops needs me to log this task and update this field and do all these things. So I got these required fields and these validation rules. And the thing is taking so long to load. So I actually think that fast context switching and the slowness to load is causing a lot of trauma. And then listen, I'm just going to say validation rules and I'll leave it at that.
Flashbacks.
Can I piggyback there one more? Because there's one more trauma story and you ended with validation rules. And this is really key. I love automation. I ran a systems integration team. Great. Automation, amazing. And sometimes, especially when you're building out something from scratch and everyone's, we need this automation because everything needs to be super fast. And then I don't want my reps to do anything. I'm like, can we just slow down on the automation? Can we just make sure they actually understand the basics of what they're supposed to do and how these inputs lead to this output before we try and automate it all? True story. A client, I will not say which one, we were building out their post-sale customer lifecycle, which by the way, did not exist at all. That was fun. I don't know how they're managing renewals. They weren't. And so we had all of these steps, beautiful process. And then we had a head of CS that's, okay, I don't want them to have to enter anything. I want just pure automation to run. All of these validation rules built in. I very diplomatically said, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should first let them learn the process, make sure they understand it, make sure they understand why they're doing it, and then we speed it up with automation. But fine, they're like, nope, I want to do automation out the gate. What would happen? I would just get ticket after ticket into my RevOps intake process that was, I can't move this stage and I don't know why. I tried all of these things. Why? Because there was so much complexity that was built in all these inputs and the rep had no idea what they were supposed to do. And then we needed to get a deal done so we could send this out for signature. It was literally impacting revenue, trauma. And so much that then we were also getting tickets after tickets to solve for our overemphasis on automation. So that's just another story.
Can I just add one more layer of trauma to that? Because I knew this was going to happen. You open the trauma door and just, like it all comes out. But just building on that example, because we've seen something similar. And what I cringed at was the person's solution to it was like, oh, we just need more training. And I was like, oh, okay. And that training, what it looked like was this massive slide deck that had all the page layout itself was so long that it couldn't fit on even 4 or 5 slides, right? So you had to break it up into all these pieces. And then there were so many arrows that you couldn't see the actual page. And they're like, let's get the page, let's put all the arrows in there. And it wasn't thinking, all right, simplicity might actually be the answer. Do we need all of this stuff? And going back to the first principles. But anyway, I just wanted to add, I felt very bad for that team that had to go sit through that.
It's like that scene from Jurassic Park where they pointed out we kept being obsessed over whether or not we could and not if we should.
We should.
So well stated, yeah.
So love this image, but let's skip over to why CRM hygiene matters. I think a lot of us are really familiar with this, so we'll do a brief overview so we can get to the really meaty stuff. But let's talk through why it matters and why RevOps should care.
Although,
yeah, I was just responding.
Yeah. I love that there's like a few here. I'm going to focus on maybe 1 or 2 of these, and then Puyan, feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
So when I ran data analytics and BI at Medallia, right, our job was operational reporting, executive reporting, dashboard reporting for the company, for the go-to-market. We built the dashboard the executive team looked at every single week. And what was so critical was obviously the CRM was one of the sources that fed that. And how many times have we been in situations, another company I was at, we used Looker. I hate Looker, by the way. Sorry, any Looker fans. But we used Looker for our visualization. And my first week I joined, the CEO came to me and said, Ann, I was a head of RevOps at the time, I need you to come and fix my executive dashboard. It's not working. The data's wrong. And I'm like, okay, who built it? Oh, I don't know. They left. I'm like, okay, who built the data model? I don't know. They left as well. I'm like, so is it a Looker ML problem? Is it a transformation problem? Let me look at that. Or is it a data problem? Turned out it was both. Of course it was both. The transformation was wrong. So the calculations was wrong. the person who had built it was no longer there. No, I didn't have anyone at my team at that time who could build Looker ML. I'm like, okay, great. Let me like figure out how we're going to solve for this. But then when I track the source data back, I'm like, okay, all the data is wrong. Who's holding those reps accountable? And so you have to attack it from both source of data or sources of data, because this wasn't just fed by the CRM, it was fed by other things that fed into this overall dashboard. But that's just one of the impacts. And why is that so important? The CEOs, literally, I use this dashboard every single week in my executive meeting to make decisions about the company. And I've been hampered in making decisions for 5 weeks because that is when something happened and the data went off and I cannot get it back online. So that's just one I'll share.
Yeah, I think Ann nailed it. I don't know if there's much else to share on that. I think for me, it really comes down to, there's just two things that matter, right? If we really go back to first principles, if you're a for-profit company, you need to be able to sell. You need revenue to come in. And for most, I'm assuming for most people here, a sales team is a part of that, right? So what you have is a team of people whose primary job is to bring revenue in and to sell, right? There's all this other layers of managers and what have you before that support that. But let's just say that front line is really what's bringing revenue in. And then you have leadership all the way here that needs to make decisions, strategic decisions, business decisions. And the connecting point between these two is right now the CRM, right? That's a system of record, or it's supposed to be. And hygiene is really the term that we use. And I know CRM hygiene is just the term, but it really is, how are these 2 points connected to each other? How are they working well together? And that's the part that for most organizations is broken, either completely, or there's just a little bit of signal and connection going through. And really without it, you're left on hope as a strategy in a way, because you're hoping that some of the leadership decisions that you make are based on really good data, but it may not be. And then you're hoping on the front line that you actually can sell and not be overburdened with admin rules. So I think that's really what it really comes down for me to that level of simplicity is, do I have a front line that can sell and stay focused on selling and be able to get the insights that I need as a leader in order to make the decisions that I need to make? Yeah.
Yes. And I'll add in one more. When I put on my CRO hat or my RevOps hat, this data-driven coaching and deal inspection, so important, both at a rep level and all the way up the chain, executive level board reporting. Example, I worked in an organization where when I joined them, they weren't doing forecast. Nobody was forecasting. There was no forecasting cadence. They didn't have a sales process. They didn't know how to get to the forecast. Literally, the board would go to, I don't know, whoever the former CRO was and say, what's our forecast going to be? But because there was no process behind it, because there were no clear stages, exit criteria that were like the reps understood that we had made it seamless for them in a guided experience, there was no way to actually know where the deals sat without going, and this would happen, and sending a massive Slack or massive email and be like, where do the deals stand? I'm like, why are we wasting all of that time? So that's one, very process oriented. The other thing is, great, maybe you have all of that, but have you made it intuitive? So another true story. I remember that I joined an organization and they were moving from, we were just selling software, so we had ARR, to now where they were launching professional services. Sometimes professional services, if it's recurring, can count towards ARR. Sometimes it is non-recurring. And so often what comes out of the CRM and that goes into your financial system is, how are you going to actually report on ARR? So they rolled out all these packages without actually codifying what is ARR, what isn't, building that into the system, and then making sure the reps knew. So I log in and I'm like, wait a minute, I have some field reps entering ARR information into this field, maybe amount. I have another one entering it here. I have no way to pull down in the same standard systematic way across all of the deals for me to aggregate up and understand where we are at with our ARR forecast. Direct implication for company reporting, board reporting, executive reporting. If you don't know how to forecast your ARR, that's just a whole nother like big problem that you're going to have to deal with very quickly.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, and I think you brought up a point that I think it's important. I didn't cover enough in the decision-making part. I think there's another really key point of like, how do you get the team to work well together, which is a process, right? And that process, I think, is important both for if you were trying a new strategy, if you're going into a new segment, a new industry, or if you're trying to scale, which probably I'm assuming a lot of people here were, or maybe are again, given things are starting to slowly rebound, hopefully. But hygiene is often, at least when people I've talked to, maybe limited to like data. Do we just have the data and the data in the right fields? I think there's another really important component to it, which is process. Is the CRM, and I'll say this, no one really that I've talked to thinks about it this way, that the CRM actually helps me follow the process. It's more like I am forced to follow the rules that are put in there. But I do think that's actually come up as quite often with leaders. It's something that they care about, revenue leaders, of like, how do I drive the right process across my organization? Deal inspection being one of them. Are you putting things in the right stages? Are you asking the right questions at the right points? So anyway, I think that's another element to hygiene that's worth talking about.
Fantastic. So I think we've covered this fairly well, but is there anything here you'd like to point out a little bit or go into a little bit more?
I think we've talked about like the impacts, forecast, information process. One other thing that we were discussing in preparation for this is how critical that the prong of accountability is, how that and really having measures and standards of accountability, and also like ways and meetings or cadences in which you hold people accountable is key. The number of times that I joined an organization, we're like, okay, we got to set up all the process and we got to implement it into the CRM, and then maybe we have a different UI, or we overhaul the CRM and we do all of the things and we train, and then we expect people to just do it and we don't hold them accountable. No, you have to then have a corresponding cadence, operating cadence that you do every single week, forecast cadence, pipeline, where you're looking at those things, where you're talking about it. I've learned that when you do that, suddenly people go, this matters. They're actually using this information. I'm not just doing this for myself. Really critical.
Yeah. So I think just really, we have covered a lot of this, but I think it might be worth going through and maybe going a little bit deeper on each one of those. So I think, listen, at the leadership level, bad hygiene is, we've talked about, it's not only unreliable forecasts and impact to revenue, but it's, I think, the ability to get the team to change or shift behavior or influence behavior of the team in one direction or another. Let's say you're trying to roll out a new methodology, you're going after a new segment, something. So if you don't have good hygiene, that's also going to be impacted. At the manager level, and I think Wade, you posted this in here, of like how important regular pipeline inspections are and accountability. Totally true. And what I've seen is, unfortunately, in those pipeline inspections, a lot of time it's managers trying to extract information from reps just to get what the current state is versus a real inspection that's done as a team. And that's rare, but when it does happen, it's beautiful. It's magic, right? You sit down together and you're like, okay, we already know where it's at. Let's talk about where we want to go with this thing. So that's another implication, that I think managers end up being not as effective as they want to be and they can be, because they're spending so much time interrogating and extracting. And then I think for the reps themselves, and you brought up a point I want to add on, which is, we talk a lot about the reps getting information into the CRM so that all those other things can follow. And we're big believers at Scratchpad in this pyramid that most of the problems start at the bottom and they cascade their way up. It's with that frontline execution. But there's a whole nother element to this where you can actually enable and support the reps by making hygiene easy to follow and easy to work with, because they may uncover accounts that they should be going after that they're not, or opportunities that should exist, but they don't yet. And that's another reason that I think, or another implication of having bad hygiene.
I have a couple more things. We knew this was going to happen, Puyan, right?
I know we're going off script, but that's fine. We don't like scripts.
I know. One more thing that I think is really important. What happens if your reps, if no one is holding them accountable, or they're not holding themselves accountable? Even better. I tell my reps when I run sales teams, I'm like, I expect you to be the GM of your business. You are the GM of your business, which means you also manage the information related to your business, right? And I say pipeline reviews are not for me. They're for you. They are for you. And there is like a stage of like maturity evolution where you're beginning, just like Puyan said, and I've gone through that. Usually it's 4 to 6 weeks where it's painful and you're really focusing on hygiene in the fields. And I'm like, I don't want to spend my time doing that, but I'm going to do it until we're tight. And then we can focus on deal strategy. But the scary part is, if you do not have rep-driven forecasting, which I deeply believe in, grassroots rep-driven all the way up, CRO, CFO, and then executive level. The alternative is this, which I have also seen. You have your CFO or your VP of finance, they're coming up with the forecast. They don't know what's happening in deals. By the way, I used to work in finance. I've reported CFOs, bless their hearts. They don't know what's happening in the deal. I don't want my CFO and VP of finance doing some top-down mathematical G-sheet model telling me where we're going to land, probably probabilistically based, as opposed to, I like to say, a deal either happens or it doesn't. It's binary. And the CFO doesn't know that. And the CFO doesn't know what signals to look at. The rep who is closest, we need to be tapping into their intelligence and making them the hero of the deal. And so that's a scary thing. Reps, you're not going to do this. We're going to get to a forecast. It's going to be a CFO-led forecast, and nobody wants that.
So if this wasn't a problem, let's sum this up as why RevOps should care. Like, where could RevOps be spending their time if the hygiene thing didn't take up 80% of it?
I almost think this question you could sit with, I don't know. I feel like I could sit with for an hour and not necessarily have all the answers to, because it's, you think of how much of your time and effort goes into fixing the symptoms of hygiene, that I actually think the more time you spend thinking about this question, and I have thought about it since we were doing the prep and this question came up, was like, the world would look very different. I know I'm getting pretty extreme with that, but I actually think it would. And to bring it, and I know, Anne, we're going to get into some of the very specific parts of it, but I actually think one thing we haven't talked about as much is the emotional impact of bad hygiene. Like, by emotional, straight up human emotions. Hard to measure. We all feel them. At least I hope we all do. And there's a lot of that in sales. And I think that the aspect of that rep feeling like, oh my gosh, I now have to go do 2 hours of work to show the work that I did and how draining that is. The manager being like, oh, got to get into that one-on-one again. I know the next steps aren't going to be updated, and I got to be the accountability police and do this. It cascades all the way up, but I just think that part of it too is worth calling out, of how the world would be different if hygiene weren't a problem, just a level of happiness. But I do think there's another aspect of what could be done, and Anne, I'll let you jump in on that.
Yeah, I thought about this because, again, we've been through the trauma. We've been in that cemetery graveyard of CRM world. And then I've worked in teams where we got to really strong hygiene. And then what really happened, you're right, it was emotional. Like, again, I've run these pipe views. I don't even call them pipe views. I call them weekly deal strategy, because that is what they are. It is meant to do deal strategy. Maybe it takes us a little while to get there. And usually when I first launch these, and I tell this to the team, I'm like, you're going to hate this initially, because we're literally starting from ground zero. We're going from 0 to 1. Nobody's been forecasting. It's going to be painful until we get into a rhythm. But stick with me through the storm, norm, perform, and we're going to a norm, perform. And the goal here is, this hygiene is so tight. We spend 5 or 10 minutes max looking at that. And then we're really learning from each other. You are learning from each other. You're not learning from me as the CRO VP. You are learning from each other. You are having discussions. You're having ideas. Suddenly this meeting becomes a celebration. Suddenly it's even a celebration of, wow, I lost that deal. And you're not worried you're going to get raked through the coals because you lost the deal. You're actually excited to come and talk about the deal that you lost, so you can share the learning, so that your peers don't make the same mistakes or can do something different. And I've seen that happen. And the morale boost, suddenly people are on camera. There's laughter, there's smiling, there's celebration. People start to hit quota, they're learning, they're starting to see, wait a minute, the wheel is spinning, that go-to-market flywheel. That's what it can look like when the CRM is not the core purpose of that meeting. It's an enabler of the meeting, so you can actually talk about the things you need to talk about.
I think everything Anne said, and then very specifically too, because I know the audience here, we have quite a few ops folks joining us. There's so many ops folks I've talked to feel like they're stuck. And I think, Anne, you mentioned this before too, like just going through a checklist or doing tactical work, doing cleanup work. And they're like, I know we have these other really important things to tackle. I see them. There are these strategic things that I could go work on, but I can't, because I've got to stay focused on this thing and solve the data problem or the process adherence thing that this new CRO really cares about. And that, again, I think is just lost potential in an incredible ops team or an ops person that's really there to do some of that strategic work, but is stuck doing cleanup work.
That resonates.
I know, I feel like we're going back to trauma again, but
yeah, it's good. We bond over trauma. It's a thing. Yeah. So let's talk about what the current fixes are and why they really don't address the problem. So let's talk through what we've tried, why it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'll start off, Anne, with a couple that I've seen and jump in. So again, this is a reflection of things we have seen many different companies try in fixing this. One is usually Salesforce. We have it. Let's invest more into it. Let's do that next big Salesforce project. Let's do a rollout. Let's do a redesign. Let's bucket all of that into let's add more to Salesforce. And usually that is, I think, somewhat, I could understand why. It makes sense. You're already using it. It's already a vendor. It's supposed to be the system of record. It could make sense that investing more into it might make it work. And listen, we were all sold this promise that of what CRM should be. And it wasn't that it's going to be this database that only sometimes gets filled out and has stale information. It's going to help you sell, and it's where salespeople should work, and it's where sales leaders get their reporting. And so it's like that promise we still try to make a reality. And that's one thing that we've seen now. It hasn't worked as well because no matter how much you add to it, validation rules, required fields, modified page layouts, flows, what have you, it is still built on the same architecture and you still have the same UI elements. Let me say that, right? So why doesn't it work well? Even if you invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's still super slow. Yeah, you may modify the page layout, and I'm going to bring some fields up here. But back to what I was saying earlier on that trauma, in sales, especially if we're solving if you believe that the front line matters and the work that they do matters, the context shifting is so important in a salesperson's job that software has to be able to keep up with that context shifting. Otherwise, the work doesn't happen. And so that's why speed is important. It's not just important for the sake of, oh yeah, people like fast and all other apps are fast. But we've really seen that be a problem. And there's no way that you can modify that with Salesforce, at least that we've seen. So I think that's one limitation that we've seen in companies that have gone that path, still end up with poor hygiene or not getting the adoption that they want. Second, it's not meeting the reps where they are. So yes, you can redesign Salesforce as much as you want, but at the end of the day, when somebody has to make a change or an update or do something, what do they have to do? Still go back to Salesforce. So you go through the gate of slowness, and then you enter the world of Salesforce to then find the field, double click, save, what have you. Even with their inline edit, it's still many clicks in order to do that. So anyway, there's many more, so I don't want to take up too much time on that, but I do think if anyone is interested in this and just wants to hear me rant about this, I'm happy to do a whole nother hour-long session on it. But we have more to get to today. But what we've generally seen to bucket it all up is the invest more in Salesforce only gets you about 10 to 20% of the way there on hygiene, and then you're back to that problem again. I guess one I promised I'd end it, but another one is just by the time you start the project and actually finish it, the sales strategy is already onto the next one. Mm-hmm. Right. And so there's this huge delay between strategy and execution across the team. So anyway, I'll stop there. And then Anna, if you want to build either that or another one. And then
it's funny, as you were thinking, I was also thinking about the speed. And I think what I find often separates, I've been in finance teams, I've been in IT teams, I've been in data teams. And what I have witnessed separate and differentiate go-to-market teams from a lot of those other orgs is the speed with which things change and the speed with which you have to move, right? And I think this is important because one of my other clients was a HubSpot house. And I worked in Salesforce. I've now worked in HubSpot a couple times, and I was blown away. Sorry, HubSpot, with like how slow things took to take when they built out automation. And we were like, this was one client. They were like, okay, and we really need to like going from 0 to done. We're building out all the process. We're building out how we calculate ARR. They had a very complex way of go-to-market that they needed to account for all the different ways. They had pilots and non-pilots, et cetera. And so they were building that all in because they were trying to turn the CRM into a financial system of record. I was like, don't do it. They couldn't go and buy a financial system of records. I'm like, okay, I guess if we really have to do this, bad idea. But all of those validations, we would have to wait. And I remember I talked to my HubSpot consultant. They're like, well, you're just going to have to like build it. And then you're gonna have to wait 30 seconds until it refreshes. And then you're gonna progress. And if you don't do that, it's gonna break the automation. Oh my God. And I would watch these sellers and I was like, I know what's gonna happen. And we rolled, I'm like, this is not gonna be good. We're gonna roll this out. The sellers are gonna get impatient. They're gonna go and try to find another way to solve for it, which is exactly what they did. And then they're gonna break all the automation. True story. And I finally was like, okay, I know you wanted us to get this and build it and get it done. Can we just go back to what I recommended, which was the longer term, better design strategy that wasn't going to result in it taking 2 minutes for a rep to complete updating what their ARR and a deal was going to be so you can report it out, because then they're just never going to go and update it. And then what will happen touches on the accept status quo. Maybe they accept status quo by saying, okay, it's crap. I'm going to accept that this is here. And now I'm going to just go and I'm going to run my pipeline out of Sheets. I'm not even go into the CRM.
That's right.
Apps will do that.
We've,
Scary.
yeah, we've seen that, just to build on that, we've seen that happen too. So under the accept status quo, it's accepting a few things. Number one, it's accepting you're just not going to get there. It's accepting that you need the data in order to forecast. And so what you'll then do, and by status quo, and that might be not doing a full service, is like what we've seen a lot of folks do is say, all right, I've rolled out MedPick, I have the whys, I have all of this financial information. I need my, product wants to know who the competitors are, marketing wants to know this stuff, all through the life cycle of a deal. Forget all of that. All I care about is next steps and close date. So that's accepting status quo and saying, team, please just focus on that. That is the only thing that comes up on forecast calls. And to your point, the rest of the stuff happens in Sheets because of the flexibility and speed. So again, that's been tried and that's happening in a lot of organizations. It doesn't solve it. You're just basically throwing your hands up. The other thing we've seen folks do is if they're already, it's almost like this journey that an organization or people go on is everything can be done in Salesforce. We tried, didn't work. Okay, what else might we be able to do? Let's brute force through behavior, right? So it's the CRO or the leaders constantly bring it up in every forecast call every week, and that cascades all the way down to managers yelling at the reps. So human. And the second part is tooling. What existing sales tech tools do we have that's not Salesforce that maybe we can force the team to use that might make part of the job easier? And I still bucket that under brute force because what we've seen are RevOps and sales leadership teams try to use a forecasting product for this, try to use call recording tools for this, try to use prospecting tools for this. Like everyone will have some feature that might be a little bit better than Salesforce's, but again, it's still going back to that root problem. And I haven't seen many organizations hire a UX designer on the ops side or hire ops folks that have that as a background.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of this, at least in my perspective, does come down to that, especially when you're dealing with how humans work. It's really a design problem.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's something that has not been tried. But again, that's somewhat self-serving. That's what we do at Scratchpad, and it's one of our core beliefs. But I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of organizations are still struggling with CRM hygiene, even after big deployments, multiple tools, and relying on spreadsheets.
I do want to acknowledge, Nicole, I see your question. We're going to get into the solution and we'll bring it up as we hit those points. So we will get to your question. All right. So we're almost at the 15-minute mark. So I'm going to push us forward to the solutions. And there is a better way. Trust me, I've seen it. I've lived it. Let's get into it. So let's talk about the 5 tips for top tier CRM hygiene. And we're going to start with defining great hygiene.
Yeah. And actually, I remember when I saw this and I said, I think there's something even before it, before you define great hygiene. I think you start with your process. You start with your methodology, and that informs the hygiene that you'll have. I think that's really key. Like when I go in, people are like, what fields do you mean? And I'm like, wait a minute. Why are we talking? Take a big step back. What's our customer methodology? How are we going to be selling? That's going to then govern your marketing funnel stages, and maybe how leads that it's going to govern your sales process. That's going to govern what your customer life cycle. All of those things then set out and will probably mean what are core exit criteria. And I'm a big believer in I'm not gonna treat my reps like children. I'm not going to be like every single thing you have to do. The core things that are going to move the deal from a buyer's perspective, that is what we're going to track. That is the thing that is most critical. Everything else, I'm going to assume that you are doing, and you should expect that I can ask you about that at any given time. But I'm going to treat you like an adult and let you be a GM of your business and only track the things that are most critically necessary, support our methodology, support how we understand what's happening in a deal. So that's just one thing I want to add. Puyan, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that covers it.
Let's get to studying how reps work. How have you seen this work really well when analyzing what's hanging people up?
I'll let you take this, Puyan, because I know you've done a lot of this.
Yeah, it's really what inspired us to start Scratchpad in the first place. We were sitting behind a rep, my co-founder and I, and we had a completely different product, but all we did is just ask, can we just watch you work? And that was weird to the rep. They're like, really? Like, you find this interesting? We're like, yes, we actually oddly do. And I think for anyone else that's interested in doing it, is do it with a completely open mind. So like beginner's mind, do not assume anything, do not jump to solutions. It is simply about observing, and it is simply about taking it in and then asking questions. But I think just staying in that observation zone is a really important part, no matter how painful it is, right? We saw this one rep work out of a task that they never closed, and they had about 4 pages of notes in the comments section of a task. And it's incredibly painful if Salesforce in that system, you're like, that's not what a task is meant to do. It's supposed to like be the task, you do it, you close it, you schedule another one. But so they were doing a job and using task as the vehicle to do that job. And so again, for us, it was really important to get back to first principles. What is it that they're actually trying to do? And how have they come up with a way in order to do that? And what can we learn from it? So I actually think it's also important to keep that mindset, which is what can I learn from my reps? And I don't see that in a lot of the leadership and ops teams that we worked with. It's more, oh, they don't know. And you said you don't want to treat reps like children. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations that happens, but really going in with that mindset that you have something to learn from everyone that you talk to. There's something there. It's just your job to unpack that. So
Puyan, can I just add real quick? Because I think you're absolutely right. And you brought up in our prep call, and I agree, this emphasis on UX and spending time watching and learning, so key. In past lives, when we went through this, when we overhauled that company I was talking about, 700 plus fields, opportunity and account object, lots of duplicity. The first thing we did is we took a stab at it. We're like, let's just eliminate all the stuff that we know is really duplicative, that should have been deprecated a long time ago. Let's clean it up. And then let's leave them with a cleaner view, and let's see how they work. It all stayed in the same place that it was. We didn't update anything based on where we thought it should go. And we kept noticing people like scrolling down, like, where's the thing? Scrolling up, scrolling down. And so we realized that navigation was such a critical issue in fighting these certain fields. And so we're like, okay, what can we do from a navigation perspective? And where were they really struggling with navigation? And they were really struggling when they were moving from stage to stage. So we, as a result, one of the changes that we made going into TAC days is we rolled everything up. We had our chevrons. I'm not the technical developer, but my tech dev would know how to do this. He exposed like a drop where you could close it up, group it, ungroup it. And you could see not just, I think this was key, not just the task that you had to do in that moment, but where it fit in all of the things. You pull back that curtain and suddenly you're like, here's everything that is involved, which reinforces our sales process and our sales methodology. And now you can just do it from up here and make it really easy. The last thing we did, and this was based off of interviews, focus groups, feedback from reps, is reps were saying, and team, we know what we're supposed to do in the stage. We really get stuck with understanding what we should do when like we've done all those things and we still are really struggling to push it forward. Like, what do we do then? And actually what that elucidated was we needed a playbook for when you get stuck, what you do. And then in case they like didn't know where that deck was or that training material, we built that into the CRM at the top right corner, and we called it next best action. And our top rep, a guy named Stefan, who did not need this, he was like, I asked him in one of these after we implemented it based on their feedback, and he like crushed his quarter. I'm like, how have you known what to do when you were stuck? He's like, what do you mean, Ann? I just go up to the next best action. I do that thing, which you culled from all the interviews with the best reps on our team. And so that's a great way to use their information and feed it back to them in a very intuitive UX driven way.
Yeah. No, I think, and actually, Kendall, I want to do a quick time check here in what we have, because I think we might be able to fast track through a lot of this here. And I can say, in terms of the solution, there's really 3 buckets that it falls into that wrap all of this stuff up into, because fixing hygiene is a really complex problem. That's the one thing that we have learned. You can't solve it by just saying, I'm going to do this one thing or I'm going to do that other thing. If you want to tackle it all, there's a visibility bucket, there's an execution bucket, and then there's an accountability bucket. Let's break each one of those down. Visibility, where are the gaps? What do I need to do? Execution, how easy is it to do? Is it streamlined? Can I do it in that moment? And accountability, can I drive self-accountability as a rep, as a manager? Can I drive that accountability down to my team so it stays consistent, right? Those are the big buckets. And if we start with execution, which is one of the most important ones, and just building on what Ann said, the whole reason we started Scratchpad was what we believed is that there needed to be better systems for how a sales team works. Because in what we saw was the Salesforce UI or any CRM's UI is too limiting. It's too slow. And reps are going to spreadsheets, they're going to note apps, they're going to other task managers. So we started with something very simple, which is what if we designed those core primitives that everybody uses, but they were purely designed for sales and how sales works? Awesome. We did that, got great traction. It's deeply connected to the CRM, so the data is there, but that only solved one part of the puzzle. That was only execution. And now we're getting into the visibility part, which for the first time, and if anyone's interested, we can chat more about this, but how do you measure hygiene? For most folks, is I look at a report and I see what's empty, or maybe we have a last updated tracker on a field so we can see, but that doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't give you the quality of the information that was put in or how frequently it's actually being updated. And so we're actually solving that now, is how do we give the best visibility from an ops perspective all the way down to the rep on how they're performing against hygiene as defined at the org. And then accountability, this is where some really cool stuff comes in around design and UX. Is at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans for now. And so how do you drive that self-accountability? And so there's a lot of cool things that we are building into the product that that are inspired by things like fitness trackers, right? If you've ever used like a Whoop or a Fitbit or the Apple Watch and the fitness thing, how long you've walked. There's so many of those elements that I think can apply directly to sales and making sure that, hey, you have, as your org's defined it, you have 7 opportunities in your pipeline that are out of compliance. Here's exactly where they are. Just go in and quickly update them, and then you hit your streak for the day, for the week. And so little things like that go well beyond brute force and yelling at reps and what have you. So anyway, I just wanted to give a kind of fast pass overview on those 3 areas on how we believe the solution to solving hygiene is really this holistic one, and that those 3 components have to work really well together, because otherwise you're only going to get part of the way there. So anyway, sorry, Camilla, if I messed up on the slides. I went off script a little bit, but wanted to make sure we covered that before the time ended here.
No, your webinar, totally fine. I
And
would
that covered
add,
the proactivity and the measuring success and all of that. Like those.
yeah, I hear you. I would add though that there's one mantra I would challenge Salesforce admins to look at again, and that is, if it didn't happen in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. It should really be, I don't care where it happened, if it ends up in Salesforce. Would you guys agree with that statement? Disagree?
I agree. And I said that, and I think what I meant, but now you're making me be like, I should adjust how I say that, is if it lives in some spreadsheet or an Excel doc and it doesn't live in any system, that whether through input and integration, it doesn't exist. It has to either live in the CRM or in another system that will then push into the system. We have some way of integrating that in.
Yep.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't care if they want to work in some other system as long as
Yeah.
it's integrated. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Okay, let's talk questions. I saw the question was removed, but I do want to go back to it because it was a good one. How do you both think about balancing, and in particular, how do you think about balancing what the customer success team needs to implement and onboard a customer with limiting the amount of data entry the sales team needs to do?
Yes, I've had to do these. I think it's a great question. I put a couple thoughts in there. One, there's also this point of you don't want to have so much, because if let's take not doing an over indexing on what you ask of your sellers too early. It's in late stage. It hasn't closed. I have had sellers, and I understand it, like, hey, we need to get started on the onboarding, all these things. And the head of CS is, you're not taking my resource until I get that deal signed, because generally they have a very heavy book. But I'm like, okay, what is absolutely essential that we need to know that we should be doing before a deal closes? If something is in late stage, and usually it depends on your stages, but I'm a big fan of like verbal approval, and then you have contract negotiation, whatever is your last. We need to be signaling that when something is in verbal, that it is a high likelihood to close. It's right before a last stage. My head of CS needs to know that. So I'm like, get ready, tee it up. They should be attending my deal strategy reviews, right? It's not just for sales, it's a deal strategy. I also bring CS in there, professional services, if we're serving like a bundle deal. And then when it hits late, I'm like, this is the time that you need to start queuing up, because you're going to have to start assigning a CS person. But actually, when I build the full funnel, I build a funnel across. Yes, there's gates between marketing funnel, sales funnel, and CS. I actually say, CS team, where are you really getting hung up in onboarding and your like back is up against the wall? And that is impacting us having a very poor onboarding, because we all know those first 30 days, some people say 90, I think your first 30 days are most critical. right? First 30 days in terms of having a strong onboarding, getting them into the system, getting them to complete a high value action. And if we don't have our ducks in the row to be able to move on that quickly on our end, maybe the customer's not ready, us move, your chances of them having a poor experience that hits you at renewal, or maybe you don't even get to renewal, will be higher. So I'm like, CS person, tell me what is absolutely critical. And then I bring both teams together and I have a conversation where they get to debate and we align as one unified go-to-market. I think you can absolutely get a few things organized as part of your late stage process. But the most critical part is, one thing I absolutely do is when it is in late stage, we send a notification. This is here. We need to start assigning reps. We prep for a handover session so that boom, the deal closes. All that contextual knowledge handover has happened. That's actually, I think, more critical than what necessarily lives in the CRM, that there has been a knowledge transfer in advance of that deal closing, or right with the timeline it closes. I'm going to pause though.
I really like that you're emphasizing talking to both stakeholders and talking through this. I would really encourage people to also think through what in the onboarding process, what in this conversation, what in this data gathering is worth reaffirming directly with the customer from the CS standpoint. Because if sales gives the goal, I really want that CS person to have the conversation. What exactly does this mean to you? So I can understand it, because it is really easy for things to get lost in translation. Would you like to add to that before I go to Pooyan to add anything?
I'll give one more and then I'll let Pooyan close us. It also depends on the nature of business. I worked in an organization where you would sell an enterprise deal. We didn't actually recognize revenue until it was like a B2B2C motion, until you like enrolled individuals. And I've worked in a couple of these. And so you actually had to get a list of people who would be users so you can, that was key. And sometimes waiting until you're at the customer to ask for the list is a mistake. Because actually, diligently, we don't get the list, we can't onboard them, we delay kickoffs, only a few months has gone by, they want a credit because they weren't able to, just repercussions. So what we did was we actually started asking for the list in verbal. Didn't mean we were going to get it, but we were like, this is critical. And you need to, salesperson, be asking for this. Be like, did you ask for this? Do you explain why the list is important? Do you explain how it's going to set them up for an on-time launch? And that conversation, that education needed to happen, and we needed to validate that conversation happen. So we had educated the customer as part of the sales cycle before the customer cycle started.
No, absolutely. And marketing really should be the starting point of setting the right expectations. And too often marketing and CS don't have a sit down. So love it. Do you want to add anything in closing?
Just on the CS side of things, I think, Kamala, what you said, I would just keep doing that, is like rechecking with the leadership and like why they bought, what their expectations are, and not just, there could be a gap, but it could be things change so fast in business, right? We've seen that happen too, that the person who bought is no longer here, and it can happen within a week. So I actually think that really resonated with me. No, but in closing, I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined. Hopefully we didn't trigger too much trauma and we shared some interesting perspectives, but I love talking about this stuff. So if any of this, I know Anne does as well, we do all the time, but if any of this resonated, you want to chat more, I think our information is being shared. And then specifically on CRM hygiene, but something we care a lot about just because it has such big implications, and we are building some really cool product around it, very specific to measuring it and improving it. So if that's interesting to anybody as well, happy to chat more about that.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here and sharing your knowledge and being generous with it. I really appreciate it. To everyone watching the call, please do take the survey and enjoy the rest of your day. We will catch you in the community.
Thanks
everybody.